At 68, I sold everything I had built for $58 million. The headlines loved the round number and the tidy ending. I walked out of the closing ceremony feeling oddly exposed, like a man whose pockets were full of reasons other people needed him to die. That evening, I took my son Kevin and his wife to a top restaurant to celebrate. I wanted a quiet dinner. Instead, I found myself at the center of a performance. They were perfect guests. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, smiles practiced to the point of artifice. They spoke about rest and travel and how proud they were, but their eyes were already moving past me. Over my shoulder, toward ledger lines only they could see. Brenda touched my hand the way a dealer touches a chip. "Let us take care of you," she said. It sounded like a bargain. While they danced to an old song, a security guard approached. He was an older man with the kind of focus that belongs to people who have to notice everything. He bent low and whispered that he had seen Kevin slip a small vial into my drink. I felt the world condensed to one fact. My son had tried to poison me to speed up my death and the inheritance that would follow. I did not make a scene. Anger is a loud currency that spends itself fast. I collected a damp napkin I pretended to drop, folded it into a pocket, and left. Outside, the city had its indifferent glow. I went straight to a private lab and paid for the kind of expedited testing money will always buy. The report came back in hours, not days. Metoprolol, at a concentration inconsistent with therapeutic use, enough to cause a heart attack in a man with known cardiac history. It would read as natural causes. For them, it had been the perfect murder. Plausible, private, and profitable. A police report would have made a circus of my life. It would have called cameras and headlines and the kind of attention that chews up reputations and legacies until nothing recognizable is left. I could have turned them over to the law and watched the public machinery do the rest, but I wanted something cleaner. Not blood for blood, but the precise removal of their motive. I would take away the prize they had tried to buy with my death. I called Cynthia Walsh. She had once been a child in our orbit, the daughter of my oldest friend. Later, she became the lawyer I trusted with the company's skeleton keys. We did not rush into rage. We made an actual plan. She brought in a team, private, investigators and former agents who read ledgers the way others read faces. They moved through my son's life like auditors with a grudge and found what greed always leaves: a trail. Kevin and Brenda were living a life that looked expensive and felt fragile. Leased luxury cars, credit cards with high limits, a house bought with money that had been borrowed against the future. Private lenders waiting with thin smiles and thin patience. The sum of it was a kind of structural failure. Unsecured debt so large it would swallow them whole. They had been positioned on the edge of collapse, and my death would have been the net. Brenda had not only been counting dollars, she had been counting canvases, my late wife Alicia's paintings. The investigators produced a transcript of Brenda calling a gallery, speaking about a private sale and my supposed failing health, asking for discretion. She had photographed paintings during visits and shared the images with dealers. It was more than greed. It was the erasure of a life. Where I saw memory and color, they saw liquidity. The discovery that chilled me most was a forged power of attorney bearing my name filed at the hospital months earlier. It gave Kevin legal access to my medical records and to someone who needed nothing more than a paper trail to map my weaknesses. Alongside it were logs of internet searches from burner phones, queries about lethal dosages, about mimicking a natural myocardial infarction, about whether an autopsy would flag certain beta blockers. This was not a desperate act. It was a plan executed like a project. Research, access, execution. With all the parts in hand, the lab result, the financial audit, the transcript, the forged document, there was no room for hope that this had been a lapse of judgment. It was a carefully engineered betrayal. Any sentimental residue I had left for my son burned away instantly. What remained was a decision to remove their motive completely. We set the stage. For a week I played the oblivious, recovering man. I took Kevin's calls, allowed him to fawn, and hinted at setting up a family trust, just enough of a promise to make him careless. Cynthia and her team worked methodically. They prepared dossiers that read like indictments and wrote legal documents that would look seductive to anyone who had been rehearsing to inherit. Then they drafted the other document, an irrevocable charitable foundation in Alicia's name, funded with the entire proceeds, and a trust paper that would be useful bait. On the scheduled morning, Cynthia's conference room became a court of final realities. Kevin and Brenda arrived flushed with expectation. Cynthia placed 5 blue folders on the table and opened the first. A toxicology report, then the consolidated financials, then the gallery transcript, then the forged medical document, and the search log. Each page was a hammer stroke. I watched greed reverse into horror. There were 2 exits. Option 1. We present the evidence to the district attorney and let the public machine run its course. Arrest, indictment, trial, conviction. Option 2. They sign a legal agreement relinquishing all claims, deeds, and any claim to my estate. In essence, exile in exchange for freedom. The foundation held the $58 million. The paintings would not be sold to feed a life of debt. They would help artists and animals, causes Alicia had loved. The choice was theirs. They signed. Kevin's hand was unsteady, Brenda's face washed with tears that might have been remorse or self-preservation. The papers were ironclad. The evidence remained locked in escrow. It could be delivered to prosecutors the moment the terms were violated. That was the point. This was not spectacle revenge. It was a surgical dismantling of motive, an eradication of the temptation that had led them to try to kill me. 3 months later, I stood in a small gallery for the opening of the foundation's inaugural show. Young artists whose names I could not pronounce explained canvases with the same fervor my wife once had. Paint under fingernails and earnest hands. Life, not ledger. I listened. Real listening, where the end of each sentence mattered, and my smile was not performance. I kept thinking about the small things I would never get back. Alicia's laugh when a painting went slightly askew. How she would press her palm to a canvas and declare we were lucky to touch something bold. Her insistence on taking the long way home because a mural had appeared. Those moments were not currency. They were the deposit of a life. Placing the paintings in a foundation feels like setting those moments loose in the world, where they can change someone who needs them. It is not revenge, it is restitution. I turned a private theft into public possibility, converting a plan that would have erased memory into one that amplifies memory. That decision didn't make the betrayal less raw, but it made the aftermath meaningful. If my son learns anything from exile, let it be that shortcuts end in ruin. If not, then our actions will speak for us. I prefer to invest in creation rather than retaliation, in studios rather than cells, in a bridge instead of a wall. The foundation hums now. It is louder than their empty celebrations were. Turning, their greed into something that will outlast us felt like a kind of justice. I did not seek to bury my son. I removed the shortcut he tried to take. If exile forces him to work, to fail, to learn humility, then perhaps he will rebuild something real. Or perhaps he will simply wither. That is a consequence he must face. I found no pleasure in watching them leave. I found no joy in cruelty. What steadied me was purpose. Alicia's name attached to scholarships and sanctuaries, the company's legacy redirected into community instead of entitlement. The money that had almost bought murder now buys studios, grants, and food for animals she would have loved. This is not a story of triumphant vengeance. It is a story of choice. I chose to reshape what remained into life, to turn betrayal into a boundary, and to make sure the one thing my son wanted, the money, could no longer justify killing. Sometimes, the cleanest revenge is not ruin, but reparation. Remove the prize, remove the motive, and let consequence teach what words cannot.